Welcome back, riders. This was definitely not a video I was expecting to make today, but here we are. Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio has announced Siren's Curse, a Vekoma tilt coaster that is billed as the tallest, longest, and fastest tilt coaster in North America. Analysis videos are not something I plan on doing on the channel much, but I felt I wanted to talk about this one for multiple reasons. Obviously, Cedar Point is one of the biggest, best, and most well-known amusement parks in the world. But this was also my home park for 2 seasons while I worked at the park. So I like to think I know a decent amount about the park, and I do care about it a lot. Additionally, just a couple of days ago, I was able to experience some modern high-thrill Vekoma coasters finally in Formula and Abyssus at Energylandia and Lek Coaster at Legendia. Given we still do not have a modern high-thrill Vekoma coaster in the United States, I thought I would be able to share some insight into what to expect with Siren's Curse given my experiences on the modern Vekomas in Poland. And lastly, there's a good amount of baggage and talking points with this coaster that I just wanted to talk about. All credit and concept images go to Cedar Point and Six Flags, but without further ado, let's dig in. Ideally, I would like to start talking from a factual and statistical basis and then move on to the analysis and personal input. However, there is something that I feel should be discussed first, which is that this roller coaster was probably not meant for Cedar Point. The following information I'm about to share has not been outright confirmed, but for all intents and purposes, I can share this with confidence. This coaster was originally meant to go to Energylandia in Poland. It seems to be due to funding, but for whatever reason it actually was, Energylandia terminated the contract even though the coaster was at least partially manufactured. From there, Legacy Six Flags came in pre-merger and bought the coaster and started shipping it to Six Flags Mexico. Six Flags Mexico was expected to announce this coaster on August 22nd, about a month ago, but the date came and went without any word about the coaster. There were some rumors that the announcement date was pushed back as there was a recent accident at the park and it would have been in poor taste to announce a new ride just after the accident. Or the other rumor was that the coaster ran into some legal hurdles and was not approved. It got pretty quiet with no word from Six Flags Mexico, and then all of a sudden yesterday, Cedar Point comes literally out of nowhere and announced Siren's Curse, which we are fairly certain is the same roller coaster from Six Flags Mexico and Energylandia. Later in the video, I'll talk about how and why this coaster ended up at Cedar Point, but I wanted to share this information now because there are a few aspects of the ride that I'm going to talk about on a factual basis that Cedar Point did not really have control over. So just keep in mind that there are certain things I'll talk about where, we might ask, why did they do this and not that? And the answer is because the coaster was built for a park in Poland. Maybe we will see some adjustments from now until ride opening, but time will tell. With that, let's talk about the ride itself. As stated, Siren's Curse is a tilt coaster built by Dutch manufacturer Vekoma. There is currently only one operating tilt coaster in the world, and that opened back in 2002, so this will be Vekoma's modern take on their tilt coaster, although there are two other tilt coasters under construction in Saudi Arabia and Texas. It's also worth noting that there are other tilt coasters that do exist, but people don't really think of those since they were made by Golden Horse, aka Genma Rides, so take that as you will. Anyways, Siren's Curse will have a height of 160 feet, a top speed of 58 miles per hour, and a track length of 2,966 feet. Cedar Point is claiming this will be the tallest, longest, and fastest tilt coaster in North America, but these are all uncontested records right now, as there are zero operating tilt coasters in North America. Each coaster will have 12 rows of 2 riders for a total of 24 riders per train. And speaking of the trains, Cedar Point highlights two aspects of these trains. One is onboard audio, and two is, quote, high-tech LED lighting on the exterior of each car. The signature element of the tilt coaster is the tilt. This is a section of track that starts horizontal. Once the train is on this segment of track, the train will lock and the track will tilt 90 degrees. This will engage with a separate piece of track that serves as the main drop of the ride, and once the track is connected to the drop, the train will release. The drop itself will be straight for the tilt track portion, immediately turning to the left and leveling out once you pass that tilt track section. Vekoma layouts are very hard to explain. It's less about this element is followed by that element. Rather, they are very fluid rides that flow almost naturally. I'll talk a little more about the layout later in the video, but right now it is worth noting that there are two inversions. Both inversions are high speed, low to the ground barrel rolls. Additionally, Cedar Point is claiming that there will be 13, quote, weightless airtime moments. Siren's Curse will have a 48-inch height requirement as well. Let's talk about the placement of this coaster. Excuse my extremely amateur and simple drawing here, but it gets the job done, I guess. This coaster is mainly using the spot of the old employee housing complex that was torn down a few years ago. This spot has been vacant for a few years, and I actually did walk around this plot of land 2 or 3 years ago to kind of see what they could do with it, and I guess a Vekoma Tilt Coaster is the answer. But in more general terms, this will be located between the main railroad station and the dive loop of Valraven, across the midway from Iron Dragon Station and the live entertainment stage. This is really only made possible by the rerouting of Perimeter Road. Perimeter Road will be rerouted closer to the waterfront and the marina, while Siren's Curse will be taking the plot left over by the old dorms and where the existing Perimeter Road currently is. Additionally, this seems to take up the space of where the bleachers for the live entertainment show once stood, but I'm fairly certain that I did not see these during my last visit to the park a couple weeks ago. Let's talk about theming. It's worth noting at this point that Cedar Point did almost no marketing campaign for this coaster, hence why everyone was so blindsided by this addition. I'll vaguely talk about why that could have happened later in the video, but for now, the point I'm trying to make is that we did not have a lot to go off of. They had posted that they were making an announcement a couple weeks ago, and that announcement seemed to have like a water theme. And then with the B-roll posted yesterday, there was virtually no physical theming aside from the lights on the trains and the color scheme, which is a stretch to call that theming. And in the trailer video, the video ends with a shot underwater, followed by a black screen with sounds of waves crashing. So, from pre announcement and the concept videos, there is not much to go off of other than something to do with water. However, the ride's website shed some light into the theming. Cedar Point says, quote, the legend and lore of mysterious creatures living beneath the surface of Lake Erie comes to life with Siren's Curse, often spoken of, but never spotted. The sirens of the lake who lured sailors to their underwater demise with their sweet, seductive songs will finally rise to the land above Cedar Point and attempt to entrap you in a sinister 2-minute fate of non-stop roller coaster innovation. You'll hear the echo of the sirens' chilling melodies as you ascend an old 160-foot tall Lake Erie shipping crane tower, the sounds growing more sinister as you reach the top. As the track locks into place, you'll flee from the beckoning call of the siren and plunge into the abyss. The legend is real, and you'll hear and see it. The vehicles also feature two firsts for Cedar Point: onboard audio, allowing the sound of the siren to envelop you as you escape her grasp, and high-tech LED lighting on the exterior of each car, mimicking the silky motion and eerie nature of the mythical creature. Alright, so with all that covered, it's time to move on to the analysis and my personal thoughts. I guess we could start with the continuation of talking about the theming. Overall, I do like it, but there are some question marks, and at first I was pretty dumb and I didn't realize what they were doing here. At first, I noticed the track was red and the supports were gray, and we knew that the Energylandia slash Six Flags Mexico track was red, so this is probably something Cedar Point was stuck with, unless they wanted to spend extra money to change colors for a coaster that hasn't even opened yet, which I will admit is dumb. It doesn't seem like a great use of money, so I understand why they didn't. But at first, I'm calling myself out here, I guess, but when I heard sirens, I was thinking of like, loud red sirens. So sirens are associated with red, so that checks out. But I was wondering, like, what does sirens have to do with water? Sirens make me think of police cars, fire trucks, and even tornado sirens, at least, the sound. And I didn't really see any association between sirens and water. Water makes me think of like horns, like a ship horn, or maybe even ringing bells, but not sirens. That is what I thought about sirens before I did a quick Google search, and it turns out sirens are half bird, half woman creatures in Greek mythology and maybe some other lore places too. They lure sailors to their deaths with their enchanting songs, and that is entirely what the website talked about. So that just went over my head, but I wanted to call myself out because you know, knowing that, the story makes perfect sense, and it's really cool that they have onboard audio for this ride, given that the music is associated with these sirens. And of course, Cedar Point is taking full advantage of being on Lake Erie, which I think it's great they're tying into that. But I'm calling myself out here and, talking about literal sirens because if I thought about it, I think a lot of other people are going to talk about it too. It's the first thing I thought of is hearing a siren that's big red light making loud noise. So overall, I'm just trying to say I think they should hammer down a little bit what kind of sirens they're talking about because not everyone's super smart and knows what they were going for here, like myself. So they just need that little extra push to make sure that people are thinking about like the mythical creatures, if that makes sense. So however they want to do that, in the queue, in the entrance, whatever, I just think they should really like double down, if that makes sense. The S's in the ride logo kind of look like mermaid tails, which is a sign of a siren, but I think there needs to be a little more. And, speaking of the logo, it is fairly bland. The S's are cool, and I like that they were able to incorporate the tilt track into the N, but beyond that, it's very bland and it's just words. I'm not a huge fan of logos that are just the ride's name. It'd be cool if there was like an actual siren incorporated somewhere, even in the background, foreground, whatever. Speaking of the trains, these are going to be pretty awesome. These Vekoma trains are extremely comfortable. They're mostly lap bars that they're not bulky and they contour pretty well with a vest restraint that doesn't really get in the way of anything. Honestly, the restraints on like the Poland Vekomas I just rode, they're not too different from the trains and restraints on rides like Jolly Rancher Remix at Hershey Park or Flying Cobras at Carowinds or even Riddler Revenge at Six Flags New England. If you've been on any of those, it's not too far off from that. And Verify is okay on the Poland Vekoma coasters. I would say they're easier to fit in than something like a B&M vest restraint, but it's not like a huge margin. Of course, you have the onboard audio and the lights. We actually have already seen what this could be like, as there is a video out there that surfaced a little while back of the circuit breaker trains. Shown in the video was the working light package all synchronized and it looked amazing, while the train was blasting Barracuda and it sounded fantastic. If you guys know me, you know I love onboard audio, so I'm really excited for that. We'll see what kind of music they go for. Maybe they get I'm a score involved, who knows? And the lights look great being synchronized. It's going to look great once the sun starts to set. Everyone's going to be watching this thing. My only worry about this is the upkeep. We often see lights on trains, even like Gatekeeper at the same park. They go out and seemingly never get fixed, or if they do, it doesn't last long at all. And many parks have just not been able to maintain both the lights and onboard audio, too. I have more faith in Cedar Point than other parks, but we'll see what happens with time. Let's talk quickly about the placement of Siren's Curse. The tilt track and drop is going to be right next to the midway, so the placement really could not have been much better. Everyone's going to be at the bottom of this thing, staring at this thing, pointing at it, watching their friends, etc. And the layout is extremely compact, so while it does require the rerouting of perimeter road, which is a pretty decent deal, it's pretty nice that the park was able to get this in without removing any rides or coasters. I guess it's replacing the employee dorms, but these were removed years ago and they were supposedly in horrible shape, so it doesn't really feel like they got rid of the dorms for this coaster since that was like years ago and it probably needed to be done anyways. And I also suppose this will mean less seating and standing for the live entertainment stage across the midway, but whether you like it or not, live entertainment has been receiving heavy cuts lately everywhere, and even at Cedar Point too, so it makes sense, I guess. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with how they were able to put this in. Let's circle back to the trains one last time by talking about capacity. I've seen some people express their concerns about capacity, and I have some concerns myself, but not necessarily in the same way as everyone else. Siren's Curse will not be a people eater, sure, but it shouldn't be bad by any means. Gravity Max, which is the existing Vekoma Tilt Coaster, also has 24-person trains and, according to RCDB, has a capacity of 1,185 riders per hour. That's actually pretty amazing. And these new modern Vekoma trains, they're pretty easy to check restraints. They were sending trains at Lek Coaster like 30 seconds maybe, and they're fairly accommodating, so I don't think that's going to slow down too many dispatches. But Siren's Curse has the same amount of riders per train as Valraven, and nobody bats an eye at Valraven's capacity. Just because something does not have 30 seats does not mean the capacity will be bad. I think it's going to be respectable. That said, I still have a concern. It seems like most people are saying that Siren's Curse will only have two trains, but from what I've seen, this is not something that Cedar Point has publicly said is true or not, or stated it has two or three trains. Let's just say they have two trains. This ride should be a fairly long cycle time. Siren's Curse has a lift hill plus whatever amount of time it takes for the tilt track to do its thing, and then you have the main layout, which is average length, I guess. Cedar Point stated it has a 2 minute duration, so let's say that's true. From dispatch to brake run, let's say it's 120 seconds, 2 minutes. With only two trains, you're losing capacity for any dispatch that is less than 120 seconds. And that should be very easy. These trains should be going out like 60, 75 seconds maximum. And then if one train goes down for maintenance, capacity on one train will flat out suck. So if Siren's Curse can only run two trains, I'd still like to see three trains for maintenance purposes, but I hope it can run three, and I think it could. Abyssus at Energylandia has an unload station. That would be the perfect way to incorporate a third train on this, and we have seen Cedar Point dabble in unload stations in the past, but again, this ride has already been designed, so it may or may not already have three trains or an unload. Who knows? We haven't really seen confirmation either way what it is. But, it may not be possible to add these in this late to the game if they don't already exist on this design. Let's talk about the layout again. And it all starts with that tilt track. It will be amazing to finally experience one of these with the sensation of being held vertically while facing down for a good amount of time. And I think it will be different enough from dive coasters like Valraven, which is literally right next door, as you aren't really held 90 degrees downward. The tilt on Siren's Curse will put all of your body weight into the restraint, which is a feeling you don't really get on the dive coasters. In fact, the sensation is quite rare, with rides like Aftershock at Silverwood or Steel Venom at Valley Fair having comparable moments, but there's not that many of them out there. Something I am tempering expectations for is the drop itself. Sure, the tilt and hanging there is going to be awesome, but I'm a little skeptical about the curved portion. Lek Coaster also has a curved drop, which is absolutely fantastic. But I think the big difference is having the tilt versus not having the tilt. A major factor in a great drop is the crest. And there is no crest on Siren's Curse as you literally start the drop vertically. You have no speed going into the drop as you will start from zero vertically. And a lot of that airtime on these fantastic drops come from, going over the crest with some speed. Cedar Point says the height will be 160 feet, but it's not obvious where they are measuring that from. Remember, not everyone will drop from the same height on this. I could see the drop being relatively weak from the front of the train. The curve just does not look that snappy to me. So, I don't know. That's just something I observed. The selling point in this ride isn't necessarily the drop, it's more the tilt and, the broken rail. So, I just see myself not being blown away with the drop itself. The rest of the layout looks good. Formula, Abyssus, and Luck Coaster were really good at squeaking in a pop of airtime at seemingly every corner, and Siren's Curse looks no different. One weaker point, in my opinion, are the inversions. The first inversion looks pretty cool as you'll be carrying a good amount of speed through it, but it's a little underwhelming that the second inversion is pretty much the same as the first one, but it'll be taken with less speed, so who knows if it's going to be better or not? Probably not. The inversion package on Circuit Breaker at Codaland looks much better in my opinion, but at the same time, Circuit Breaker looks to have less airtime. I guess it comes down to what you prefer. I definitely welcome the additional airtime moments. I got my eye on that first element after the drop, and I know the last airtime hill on the triple down will be fantastic since Abyssus has something very similar to that I loved. Even the element following that hill looks great. All the modern Vekomas in Poland excel in giving little pops of airtime and the most unassuming transitions, almost like how GCIs work with their funky direction changes. All three of the Vekoma Poland coasters, they flow extremely well from element to element, and Siren's Curse looks to do the same. So, overall, on the surface, I'm a fan of Siren's Curse coming to Cedar Point. I don't think it's the perfect fit. It might be a little redundant with another coaster that focuses on a gimmick before the drop, Valraven, literally right next to Siren's Curse. And while the coaster alone looks pretty good, I feel like it leaves a little to be desired in the vein that Cedar Point always goes bigger and better. If you heard Cedar Point is getting a tilt coaster, I would feel like it's a little disheartening that it's 160 feet tall with less than 3,000 feet of track. I'd expect, 200 feet, at least 180 feet tall, and over 3,500 feet of track, probably pushing 4,000. It looks so short height wise compared to Valraven, which again is right next door. But again, this coaster was never meant to be installed at Cedar Point. They took what they were given. And what they were given is pretty great. The tilt is sure to catch everyone's attention and will be a fun sensation while on the ride. And the following layout will be so much fun on its own, even more than Valraven. And I like the idea of the theme. Tying the coaster to Greek mythology and Lake Erie is awesome. People are going to love the onboard audio. So, generally speaking, I see people ranking this somewhere around the fifth to sixth best coaster in the park. I could see some people placing it within the top five, while others place it below some of the B&Ms in the park in that like 7, 8, 9 range. It should be well received either way, and a coaster that everybody's going to stare at and tell others about. But that's not all, folks. There's a whole different conversation to be had about Siren's Curse. You can call it the T. Remember how I said this was originally meant for Energylandia and then was going to Six Flags Mexico and then ended up at Cedar Point? How did that happen? The answer is simple. Top Thrill 2. If you are somehow unfamiliar with the whole situation, Top Thrill 2 was the reincarnation of Top Thrill Dragster. Zamperla was the chosen manufacturer for the project. They took away the hydraulic launch and replaced it with an LSM forwards backwards forwards swing launch by adding a 420-foot spike to the rear of the launch track. This was a huge investment for the park and was slated to open in 2024 as the park's biggest addition since 2018. And I guess it did technically open in 2024, but it didn't really feel like it because it was an absolute nightmare worst case scenario and only operated for 6 days. That was it, six. When it originally went down, it was famously said that it was not a summer long issue, but it ended up being more than a summer long issue as it was shut down for the entire season. This was an absolute failure on both Zamperla and Cedar Point. Zamperla had no business taking on a project of this size. They had claimed to make recent strides in reimagining their coaster department, but they went for the home run when all they needed was a base hit. You don't go from opening a wild mouse that had issues, mind you, to a 400 plus foot, 100 plus mile per hour swing launch roller coaster. And Cedar Point loves to call out Zamperla for failing to deliver, but the park is just as much at fault for choosing Zamperla. They cheaped out, plain and simple. They took a huge gamble and lost, horrifically. And that is exactly why they are adding Siren's Curse. The park had an awful year. Nobody was happy with them, and they lost a lot of their reputation. The park really needed a reason for people to come back next year because a lot of those people lost faith in them over the Top Thrill 2 situation. This time last year, I guarantee you that Cedar Point had no plans to add a roller coaster for 2025. Top Thrill 2 was still an expensive addition and was supposed to be popular for years to come. That's still possible, but the damage from this past season is done, and the park was scrambling. The problem is, you can't build a roller coaster that quick. There are months that need to go from even something like the initial first idea, like, hey, let's add a roller coaster, to getting like official concept, let alone construction. Let's say Cedar Point knew they were in real trouble in June/July. It's way too late to add a significant roller coaster for 2025 if you first thought about doing it in June or July of this summer. But you know what is possible? Adding a roller coaster that already has its final concept finished and at least partial manufacturing is already done. Who knows if it's actually true that Six Flags Mexico could have built this coaster or not? But when Richard Zimmerman came in after the merger and saw a significant roller coaster in this state, it was like the angels were singing and the lights were shining. Hallelujah. A compact coaster that could fit in the park, a marketable coaster, a good coaster, a quality coaster. It really could not have worked out any better, all things considered. Cedar Point is adding a roller coaster that will change many people's minds that might have vowed to not return in the near future. And who knows what the state is of Top Thrill 2? How much does the park know? Do they expect it to run consistently next season? Do they have any idea when it may reopen? Well, those questions don't matter as much when you're adding a separate roller coaster that's going to stand on its own. If Top Thrill 2 somehow does not open again next season, at least they could point to Siren's Curse. And if Top Thrill 2 does reopen, which it should, hopefully, then Cedar Point may be in store for one of the greatest seasons ever in their history. I'm personally already salivating at the idea of returning to Cedar Point next season multiple times with practically two new roller coasters that will each be great. It's a win win. Now, there is something to be said about this that is honestly a little off putting for me. Of course, it's great that Cedar Point is getting a tilt coaster. I'm excited for it. But on the flip side, It's sad to think about how this came into fruition. First off, the only reason Cedar Point is adding Siren's Curse is because they messed up. They cheaped out and they went with Samperla and it was a complete failure. When Steel Curtain failed, Kennywood did not have the luxury to have something else on the docket. They add a new coaster every 10 years, and if it's a dud, they're out of luck. When Holiday World did not see attendance growth from Thunderbird, they couldn't add something else of the same magnitude to double down. Heck, it's been 10 years and they still have not spent that same money again yet. And maybe they never will again. And then don't even get me started on the parks that have not received any new roller coasters in 10, 15, 20 or more years. So then enter Cedar Point. Top Thrill 2 and Siren's Curse are two significant roller coasters in 2 years. Maybe even 1 year if you want to tell me Top Thrill 2 is a 2025 roller coaster, as long as it runs somewhat consistently next year. I wouldn't be mad if you told me that. It's not unheard of for parks to add coasters in back to back years, but it has become rarer in recent years. But basically, the only reason Cedar Point is having that happen to them is because they messed up. They made a mistake. Obviously, it's not a reward since so much of their reputation was ruined and they had an awful year, but in a way, it feels like a reward for messing up. Cedar Point could have one of their greatest seasons ever next season, and it's only because they messed up. Maybe I'm just jealous, but it doesn't really sit right with me, especially when you consider that they basically stole this coaster from Six Flags Mexico. Now, again, it might be true or it might be false that this coaster could not be legally built at Six Flags Mexico. They couldn't get it approved, whatever. Let's say that the government said no and that this coaster had to go to a different park in the chain. Okay. Cedar Point still would have been one of, if not the last park I would have chosen. This coaster would have been so much more beneficial at literally any other park in the chain. It would have been a cheap headlining coaster for the bottom dwelling parks like Six Flags America or Michigan's Adventure. It would have been good additions for the mid-sized parks that are due for a new roller coaster like Valley Fair or Six Flags New England. Yes, I know Six Flags New England is getting a new coaster next season, but hypothetically, this tilt coaster would have been added instead of Quantum Accelerator, just making a point here. It would have been a perfect example a year ago. It would have been even more beneficial at even some of the larger parks like Kings Island. They haven't built a big coaster in a couple years now. They're starting to be due. Or Six Flags Magic Mountain. It's just something about Zimmerman coming in post merger and plucking away this coaster from Six Flags Mexico and giving it to Cedar Point of all places. It's like the rich get richer, or when Mama Bird keeps feeding the healthy babies while the weaker ones are left for natural selection. Alright, maybe a little drastic, but you get the point. Did Cedar Point deserve this roller coaster? No, not in the slightest. Did Cedar Point need this roller coaster? You can make a case that they needed it to help lessen the blow of the awful season they just had, sure, but strictly from the viewpoint of adding this coaster to their collection, especially after receiving huge coaster this season, no, they did not need it. If Cedar Point really wanted a tilt coaster, they could have waited a few years to make sure that there aren't any issues with them since a new modern one has not opened yet still, and then build the biggest and baddest and longest tilt coaster out there in true Cedar Point fashion. But it's happening anyways. Again, this ride is going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it, but I can't help but feel a little guilty about how this came to be. So those are all my thoughts about Siren's Curse. Are you excited to ride this? What do you think about the fit at Cedar Point? Feel free to leave all your thoughts in the comments below. And thanks for checking out this video. Push down, pull up, exit to the right. Hope you enjoyed the video, and go have your greatest day yet. Choo choo, bye!